This is your Friday Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand. Plenty to talk about today. I'll be joined in a little bit by Tim Johnson, MMA fighter. Big bout on Friday night, Bellator 261. It's on Showtime around 8 p.m. Heavyweight bout. Tim Johnson, a Minnesota native, wrestled at Minnesota State Moorhead. He's been kind of working his way up the ranks, fought in UFC for a while, now with Bellator. Really enjoyed a conversation I had with him, so I hope you guys do as well. We'll have that coming up for you in a little bit. Let's explore some Twins trade ideas, too, as part of several questions that I will answer, some listener questions that I have time to get to today. A lot of fun with those, some serious, some not so serious, but I think I'll make the question about possible Twins trade targets the centerpiece of those questions and answers. But first, what did I miss? Twins, Cleveland. It was only fitting that it came down to a moment in the eighth inning where we've seen Eddie Rosario do this so many times at Target Field, a clutch hit. This time, though, for Cleveland. Breaks a 1-1 tie. Cleveland goes on to beat the Twins 4-1. The Twins' difficult season, to say the least, continues. Eddie Rosario's year hasn't been great, but it's been getting better. He has 41 RBIs now. That's more than anybody on the Twins. He's played in 69 of 72 games this season for Cleveland. That sort of durability can't be overlooked for a Twins team that hasn't had a lot of great luck, especially with injuries, especially in the outfield. Now, the Twins in the offseason decided they didn't need Eddie Rosario, and it made a certain financial sense. They've got a glut of young outfielders coming up. We've seen Alex Kirilloff, who may or may not stay in the outfield, might become a first baseman. You've got Trevor Larnach. You've got Max Kepler. You've got Byron Buxton when healthy. There's no room necessarily if you think all those guys are ready. So it made sense that there was, if that was a salary that they were going to shed, that was a way to free up some money to go do some other stuff. Rosario gets a 1-year, $8 million deal with Cleveland. And again, he's not the reason, I wouldn't say, that things have fallen apart this year for the Twins, but he is a heart and soul guy. He is one of those guys that affects clubhouse mood. He's one of those guys that, has slightly better career numbers in the clutch than he does overall, seems to get big hits, not afraid of the moment. Not saying the Twins don't have other players like that, but he is a guy that set a certain emotional tone for this team, and I think he is missed in a lot of different ways. And I mentioned the durability. I mean, he had almost 600 plate appearances every year from 2017 to 2019. He played in 57 of the 60 games last season for the Twins. And again, you could kind of see the beginning of the end last year. But, all that said, I feel like the Twins miss him, and I think Cleveland was smart to pick him up to bring him into that mix. Not that he's having a great year; he's hitting a little over 250, 41 RBIs. We don't love the counting stats these days, but those count, and those are a reason why a team can win and pull ahead, and be where Cleveland is, and maybe where the Twins are. So I'm curious. I'd love to go back and see how this season played out differently if Eddie Rosario was on the Twins instead of Cleveland. Again, I don't think it's not the difference in 3, 5, even 8 wins. I don't think a guy like that. You romanticize what someone brings to the table when he is one of those guys that seems to get a lot of clutch hits, but I do think they miss him more than maybe they wanted to let on, maybe more than they realized they would. And, it's just unfortunate that they had to learn it the hard way now and watch him do those things for Cleveland that he used to do for the Twins.
Enjoy your money your way when you switch to Royal Credit Union. You can pay friends and family for free, deposit checks on the go, and even get alerts about your account sent in real time. Stop in and open your account today or get started at rcu.org/yourway. Insured by NCUA.
Happy to have on Daily Delivery today Tim Johnson, MMA fighter. He's got a big bout coming up on Friday. Fights for Bellator. It's going to be on Showtime Friday night. Main card looks like it's going to be around 8 o'clock Central Time. Tim, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm interested in your story. So maybe we can travel a little bit back in time before we dive too deep into this specific bout. This Bellator 261. You are a Minnesota native. You wrestled at Minnesota State Moorhead. You're from Lamberton, Minnesota, which is kind of southwest of the Twin Cities quite a ways. Is that right?
Yep, that it is. Down there in the corner, probably, definitely closer to Sioux Falls in Minneapolis, probably about an hour away from, hour 15 minutes away from Sioux Falls.
Talk me through your, that's a small town that's, less than 1,000 people. How do you go from there to, college wrestling to now doing what you are now?
I think the best way to explain it is I didn't go with the plan always. I kind of just went with the flow of things. I wrestled at my first 2 years wrestling. I wrestled at Bridgewater Junior College in Wilmer, and then got done with that and kind of got bored, joined the military, joined the Minnesota Guard. And then when I got back from, basics and all that stuff, then I went up to Moorhead and wrestled up there for a couple of years. And once I got done with wrestling, there was some area heavyweights that were in fighting, and heavyweights are few and far to come by. So after I got done wrestling, they're like, "Hey, you don't have to fight; just come on in and just be a body for us to roll around with." I'm like, "Okay." Within 8 weeks, I think I took my first pro fight, and from there I just kind of fought for fun. And after I got back in employment, kind of started training again, and started taking it a little more seriously in about 2014. I started actually training MMA. All my fights prior to that, all I did was utilize my wrestling. I didn't really know how to throw a punch. And I just kind of knocked off the right wins, and eventually went from the regional level, getting signed by the UFC. Kind of had a hot, cold career with the UFC. And I was let go, or they didn't renew my contract in 2018. And I instantly wanted to go over to Bellator. I knew I liked their format. I knew I had a lot of opportunities over here, and didn't start my Bellator career the way I wanted to. And this last 18 months here, I racked off 3 good wins, and finally within reach of my goal.
Now you mentioned the earlier bouts. I think a lot of those were in Fargo, right? Fargo, North Dakota.
Yeah, pretty much all of them were. I think I had one in like Newtown, North Dakota, but they're pretty much all in Fargo.
Gotcha. I'm a Grand Forks native, so I know the area reasonably well. What's it like as you're kind of building up and kind of those early bouts in mixed martial arts? What's the scene like, I guess?
Fargo actually, up there in the border of North Dakota, Minnesota, there we had a really, really good MMA environment. There was a lot of fans, a lot of area fans. What's Little Pond big, I guess, would be a Little Pond superstar.
Yeah.
A lot of regional fighters and fight fans will understand that term. A lot of the regional guys, were kind of like what like kind of how I started out. We didn't really expect to do anything. We just kind of like feeling like a superstar the night after the fight.
Sure. And then you even going back a little bit further, Lamberton, what's growing up in Lamberton like, and how did you get to I think you mentioned you wrestled in Wilmer for a couple of years at a smaller college, and then on the way to a Minnesota State. Did you know you wanted to wrestle as you were growing up?
I wrestled. I grew up on a hog farm outside of Lamberton. We raised row crop as well. So I had a pretty good work ethic growing up, a lot of chores with the hogs. And wrestling was a part of my life, but I actually went to college for football. I wasn't going to wrestle. After the football season was over, that first year at college, the wrestling coach was like, "Hey Tim, why don't you give wrestling another try?" I'm like, maybe, I don't know. Like 2 days later, I'm like, why not? And I ended up, not quitting football the following year and just making wrestling my priority.
Growing up on a hog farm, does your family still do that? Is that still part of the Johnson family?
No, we got out of that in the market crash. Was it 97?
Okay.
I think 90. Yeah, when the market crashed, we kind of got out of there. Mom works at school. Dad works at the co-op now.
Okay, gotcha. So, you mentioned a deployment originally. Was that when you were deployed to Iraq? Is that correct?
Yep, deployed to Kuwait, Iraq, in 11 to 12. So we were part of the pullout of Iraq.
What was that? I mean, just like a small question for a lot, I'm sure that happened, but what is that experience like? How did that kind of shape you as you came back, especially?
No, I loved it. I had a great experience. where that goes with saying with saying some other things. But it grew me up. I was a 25. Still kind of a little bit of a immatureness in me yet, and the deployment definitely kind of grew me up a little bit, and my maturity, and just kind of had a different outlook on the world and life in general after we got back.
Now, like you mentioned, your path took you through UFC, and then you signed with Bellator. It looked like one of the biggest fights you had was a little over a year ago, maybe in 2020, a big victory. What did that do for you, for your confidence, for your profile, things like that?
Yeah, I guess, the resurgence, started with the Tyrell Fortune knockout fight in February.
Yep.
Everyone, I think Vegas had me as a 6-1 underdog for that.
Wow.
And, it's kind of a running joke now. Like, I'm always the underdog. No one ever expects much of me. Like, even now, I'm like almost a 3-1 underdog for this fight.
Okay.
And that's kind of the way I like it. Fly under the radar and, kind of almost put a little chip on the shoulder. And then, the pandemic happened and they started getting fights going. And, I had another big opportunity at Michigan. I was able to get a TKO win there. And I just was able to rattle it off and avenge one of my first losses in Bellator. I was able to get a win against Cheick Kongo in France. And, I hate saying this because it was such a bad year for so many people, but I think 2020 was one of my best years ever.
Yeah, I mean, understandably, you that's kind of when you had your career take off to a certain degree, and now there's this big fight Friday on Showtime as part of Bellator 261. But as in the midst of the training for this, you called in with the National Guard again as part of the Derek Chauvin trial and kind of preparing for all that. How much of a disruption to your training was that? How long were you here? And B, what was that time of your life like? Because that's pretty fresh.
Yeah, so I got out of the Guard. I didn't re-up in 2016. And I always planned on going back and getting my other 10 years. I had 10 years then. And, I just took a break to focus on my career for a while. And I had a buddy, recruiter buddy, say, hey, you've been out for almost 5 years. You might want to rejoin, because if you don't, you have to go back to basic training. So
okay.
I'm like, I really don't feel like doing basic training again. So I rejoined in November, and it was my first drill actually back. And we started already training up for kind of anticipating the deployment in Minneapolis. And, probably 3 weeks after that first drill, we got called up and had to start getting everything. I was in state from March 4th till I think about April 15th. And yeah, so we were first ones. We were at the courthouse there the whole time. It's all about my unit, or the unit leadership, and they didn't have to do this for me, but they did. And that I just appreciate it from that aspect. They actually let me cut out about 2 weeks before everyone else, so I get training for this fight.
Oh wow, okay. So what was that about? You said mid-April or so that you were able to get back to training?
Yep.
So where are you at now with your training and your kind of, I imagine, I think the story for a lot of MMA fighters that start out as wrestlers, you probably had that piece of it, and maybe you even said that you have that piece of it, then you've got to add some other things, I imagine, as you fight more experienced people as you get up the ranks, correct?
Oh yeah, definitely. I say this all the time. Wrestling's a great base, but it only gets you so far. Wrestling will get you in trouble in MMA. You have to know when to wrestle and when to shut it off.
Sure.
And I'm pretty basic. I just stick with a good wrestling base and boxing. I'm all about the acronym KISS. Keep it simple, stupid.
Well, it seems like a pretty good philosophy in a sport like MMA. I mean, a lot of, just looking through your career, I think 15-6 overall, and a lot of bouts are quick. I mean, it's a sport where, for those who are uninitiated, a lot of things happen quick. A lot of these bouts end in the first round. I mean, some of them go to a decision. You've had a few like that, but what's the feeling like when you get into, the octagon, as it were, the ring, and you're in there, and you're kind of in this space where anything can kind of happen. It can happen fast.
Yeah, I mean, initially when they first get in there, it's you kind of think to yourself, crap, they locked the door, I can't get back out. I mean, it's something that some people say they get used to it. I think they're lying. There's always nerves, and you're walking in there going, man, knowingly you're going to get in a fist fight and elbows, kicks, everything else. So it takes a couple of seconds to kind of adjust your mindset a little bit. And, but once you touch gloves with the opposite guy, muscle memory takes over. No matter where your head's at least your body is going to function.
Career-wise, how do you gauge the importance of this fight? Where is it in terms of kind of the most, out of your 21 bouts previously, especially all the ones in UFC and now in Bellator, where does this one rank in terms of importance at this stage of your career?
This one's definitely got to be number one. This is what from my first fight in 2011 to now. That's a 10-year career. Or was it 2010? I can't remember. See, I already ate too many shots to the head. But this is what, eventually when I started training hard in 2014, this was my goal, was to achieve a championship in a major promotion and kind of know to myself that I'm one of the best in the world.
Gotcha. Are you still based in Fargo? Where do you do most of your training now?
I actually after my first Czech Congo fight in 2018, I moved to Las Vegas. So I live out in Las Vegas now. I train at Extreme Couture out there. Prior to that, I was training in Fargo at the Academy of Combat Arts, and it was a great gym, great coaches, but I just ran out of bodies to train with. My main trading partners were 185 pounds, so that doesn't really equate to success. I wasn't setting myself up for success with that. So finally I had to make the decision to move across the country.
I know you're fighting as a heavyweight. What's your fighting weight generally?
It used to be I had to cut down to get below 265. Now I'm kind of hovering around the 260 area.
Okay. That's a couple of big bodies in there. Then it's got to be how do you psych yourself up? Let's talk a couple more things. Like when you get, when Friday comes, how do you either calm yourself down or psych yourself up? How do you get yourself in the right mindset?
Just kind of, it's easier said. Saying this is way easier than said than done. Because you do have nerves. It's just easier I just keep telling myself it's just a fight. It's not the end of the world. You could win, you can lose. You're not gonna. It's not like you're driving down the road looking for roadside bops. This is just a competition, and whatever happens. Just make sure that you go out there and put on a performance or put the output on that you're gonna be happy with, and that's something that I've always been. I can handle a loss as long as I know that I did everything I could.
Your parents, family, will they watch? Is it a hard thing for them to watch? They cheer you on. How does that work?
Yeah, no, they watch. They'll have watch parties out at my sisters. They have out at their resort at their campsite there. The whole resort comes and they do a watch party there. My parents will do a watch party with some family friends. And yeah, no, that's they don't. My parents don't necessarily like the sport, but they support me in it.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Well, hey. Had a great time getting to know you a little bit here, Tim. Best of luck in your bout Friday. That's Valentin Moldavsky, I believe is the correct pronunciation there. He's 10-1. That should be a good bout. It should be exciting to watch if you have Showtime Friday night, main bout around 8 p.m. and you should check that out. So Tim, best of luck with that and everything else going forward. And thanks for joining me here today.
No, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Take care.
Yep, you too.
Love the honesty from Tim Johnson when he talked about, just getting into the ring and the nerves that hit you when you realize what you're in store for. Loved how he kind of talked through how he calms himself down. Just really interesting insights from, an athlete who competes in an arena that I don't get into all that often. I don't watch much MMA, but I'm pulling for him. I hope he does well on Friday night and for the rest of his career. No doubt about that.
AC out there in the flat. There's a ball thrown in there low. That isn't Snooker's fault.
That Jerry Burns rant is reserved for Jose Barrios. Thursday night pitched a great game. 6 innings, a little over 6 innings, 4 hits, 1 run. Not his fault that the Twins lost 4-1. Deserved maybe a better fate. Didn't get the loss, left with the 1-1 tie, but nevertheless did not get the win in that game. You realize the Twins had won 7 straight Jose Barrios starts going into this game. That is a lot for a team that has struggled to the magnitude they have struggled this season. This year, as a matter of fact, is not Jose Barrios' fault in any way. I know people want more from him in some directions, but you know what? Guy is 7-2 now, 3.41 ERA. That's an awfully good season, especially for a team that has not been going great. And that leads me to my next segment, which is a lot of discussion of your questions. And the first question from Matt Wells: are any teams likely to want any of the players that would make sense for the Twins to trade besides Jose Barrios? Now, I gotta include Barrios first of all, because I think that's the primary asset they have. But they've got some interesting players, and I think there is more than Jose Barrios that other teams could potentially be interested in deals that could bring back decent prospects. I think Nelson Cruz, Taylor Rogers could be in the mix. I think Byron Buxton, who I've talked about as not being untouchable, I would be surprised if that was a mid-season move. But Barrios, Taylor Rogers, and Buxton, all free agents after the 2022 season, meaning they're not just rentals. They're not just guys who are going to, go to a team for 2 months, 2.5 months, and then just, sign in free agency with somebody else after that. They all have value beyond that, team control for one more year after this. So got to start with Barrios. I know the question was besides Barrios, but I think Barrios has a lot of value to a lot of teams. Reading an MLB.com piece, kind of a roundtable looking at who might be looking at starting pitching, who in particular might be looking at Jose Barrios. The Yankees name came up. Boy, wouldn't that be a kick in the butt, right? You don't want to see Jose Barrios go there. It mentioned like Tampa Bay, Oakland, although those are teams, while they might benefit from pitching, they might also, those aren't necessarily teams that add payroll necessarily or add guys that are coming up onto their paydays. Those are teams that want more team control generally when it comes to that. So you can see the Yankees making a run at Barrios. You can see any team that needs a starting pitcher going after Barrios. Any team that's got a decent farm system that could give the Twins 2 or 3 prospects, including a really high level one that might not be too far away from making a debut. Because I don't think the Twins are in this to compete again in 2023. This is a team that was built to win this season. It hasn't gone their way this year. But I think any players they get back, the primary players got to be awfully close to making a debut, maybe even later this season, just not ready, to be, a mainstay necessarily yet, but someone who's ready to break in and get that start in the majors. So I think Jose Barrios is the most likely trade candidate, and I think he is going to get traded because you maximize your value with that trade. Even though the rotation looks terrible without him, I just don't see them signing him to a long-term extension if they haven't done that already. Nelson Cruz, of those 3 guys, the 3 guys I mentioned that are coming up on walk years after 2022. Cruz a free agent after 2021. He can be a free agent after this season, so he's more of a rental candidate. He's been hitting really well lately. I wrote him off on this podcast about 2-3 weeks ago, so that I'm worried. I think he's fading. Boy, that was dumb, wasn't it? It looked like it, but boy, he had a resurgence again. A lot of teams could be interested in him, especially, this makes sense if the Twins are able to deal him to a team and maybe they retain some of the salary for him the rest of the year, gets them a slightly better prospect than they might get otherwise for a rental player. But I could see him going somewhere easily, move Miguel Sano to DH, move Alex Kirilloff to first base on a permanent basis. You lose something because Nelson Cruz is bad in the middle of the lineup. I mean, again, you take away Nelson Cruz, you take away Jose Barrios, this team is floundering even worse. But, if you're 10, 11, 12 games under 500 already, what does that really matter? You got to get better for 2022 and beyond. Taylor Rogers, probably another name to really consider in this mix. Again, hard to imagine the Twins without Taylor Rogers. He's the only relief pitcher you trust. A lot of teams would line up for Taylor Rogers, though. He's got some versatility. He can set up, he can close, he's got experience in that, he gets strikeouts, he's not afraid of the moment. So I can imagine him being someone too who, after a year and a half, he's going to be a free agent as well. Is that someone the Twins want to pay long term? Are they going to pay him long term, or are they going to look at it and say, you know what? He's going to get expensive. We could get some prospects in here. We could get somebody else that could be a lower cost, longer term replacement for him. So I think those are the 3 most likely players that will be dealt by the Twins: Jose Barrios, Taylor Rogers, and Nelson Cruz. Maybe not necessarily in that order, but I would not surprise me if any of those guys go, and it wouldn't surprise me if there were some other minor moves as well around the edges. And I think I answered one of Mark Jensen's many questions. He had 4 questions, one of them being first 3 players I think the Twins will trade. He also wants to know when the fire sale begins. It could be sooner rather than later. I was kind of looking at this stretch. I mean, Thursday night started a stretch of 25 games against AL Central teams. I was kind of looking at it like, is this their last kind of attempt to maybe get back into some sort of relevant position? But if the start of this stretch goes poorly, if they go 3-7 or something like that and fall even further behind, they might not wait too long into July to say, you know what, this just isn't working. Maximize value, make these trades. So I think a little bit of it is dependent on how this next 7 to 10 game stretch goes. Again, a lot of games against Chicago. They got 10 games against Chicago after this Cleveland series in their next 20, 21 games. So an opportunity to make up ground, but more likely an opportunity to lose even more ground. So again, a little bit dependent on how things go, but would not surprise me if things go poorly in the next week to 10 days, if it happens earlier in July than closer to the deadline. Mark also wants to know, how do we judge Gopher football recruiting for 2022? I'm going to have to admit that's not necessarily my area of expertise, but I think PJ Fleck being able to get back out onto the road right now, do his thing face-to-face will only help them in the long run because that is where his strength generally is. Mark also wants to know, will the T-Wolves make the playoffs next year? I don't think so. Everybody knows me. I've had Timberwolves optimism, perhaps to a bizarre degree over the years. I've keep wondering, is this the year they turn the corner? Is this the year they turn the corner? And I don't think this is necessarily a proclamation that they're not going to be better next year. I could see them winning 35, maybe 40 games, contending for a play-in, if that's still a thing next year, if that's going to be the way the NBA does things going forward, where they could be a top 10 seed and get into that mix potentially, but being a top 8 team, and specifically being a top 6 team where you're automatically into the playoffs, I just don't see it. I think if they would have gotten that top 3 pick in the lottery earlier this week, that might have been a conversation, because then they would have had an extra asset to go and get maybe one more really, really good player. But as it is, I just don't see how this roster turns enough of a corner to be a playoff team unless Gerson Rosas is able to make a trade that I don't imagine he can make at this point. I think next year is about getting better, getting closer, but not necessarily making the playoffs next season. They need to show a next level of improvement next year, to be sure. I just don't think playoffs is where they're going to get to after that point. Mark also wanted to know my favorite Taco John's meal. I'm very basic. I go on Taco Tuesday. I get 5 tacos generally, unless I get 15 like I did 4 years ago and eat all 15. I generally just get 5 tacos, eat the 5 tacos. Every once in a while, I throw in a potato ole because you got to have some potato oles, but usually just the tacos for me at Taco John's. And my friend Dana Wessel will take this one last, wants to know if you could sub in for one game for Crunch, TC, Nordy, or the Vikings mascot, which would you pick and why? What would you most be looking forward to doing? I gave this a lot of thought, probably more thought. Not that it didn't deserve thought, because it's a good question, but it's not necessarily a serious question. But I got into it. I got into the weeds. I'm thinking, okay, TC Bear, I don't think I want to necessarily be TC Bear. You got too much weather variance there. It could get hot in that costume. I don't think I want to be TC Bear. It's a long game, too. Baseball, you never know how long the game is going to go. And there's just not as much fun stuff you can do, unless it's one of those softball days where TC gets to hit the softballs over the fence. Then maybe. Vikings, no, that's not what I'm going for. Wild, I can skate, so that would be okay. I could see myself doing that, but really, if the question is what do I want it to be, it's Crunch. It's easily Crunch, because you got a fixed amount of time you're going to be in that suit, and the thing I'd certainly be most looking forward to, and let's be honest, most terrified of, is those trampoline dunks. I would love to try that in the mascot costume. I'm sure it would take a lot of practice. I would probably break something and hurt something very badly, but that part of it would be extra, extra fun. So Dana Wessel, I would like to be Crunch for a day. Maybe we can make that happen at some point. That'll do it for today and for the week. Thank you so much for joining me on Daily Delivery. If you missed any of the episodes this week, maybe you should listen to them over the weekend. It's going to be hot. It's going to be a good podcast listening weather, I like to say. Download this podcast always wherever you get your finer podcasts. Read Star Tribune, StarTribune.com. We'll be back again on Monday.